Welcome to this presentation where we're going to look at using Pixie Linux on OpenSUSE 11.4. I've got my server set up, and this is already set up as a DHCP server. What we need to add to it is the syslinux package and a TFTP server. So going out to the command prompt and gaining root privileges with the su command, so switching user. So I'm now the root user and we'll use Zypper to install syslinux and a TFTP server. We're going to use the ATFTP server here. So you can see the Zypper command and the installation going ahead. Once they're installed, of course, we need to configure everything. So I'm going to start the TFTP server and configure it for auto start. If we check with the netstat command, we can check our UDP ports and we can see that port 69 should be at open, and it is. This is the port that the TFTP daemon is using. This is a standalone daemon rather than using the XINetD service. Now if we move to the directory that TFTP uses, so server TFTP boot, currently it's empty. We need to populate this. So this is where the syslinux package comes in. So when copying across from the USR share syslinux and the Pixie Linux 0 file, so this is our boot file. So when we boot to Pixie Linux, we'll use this as our boot file. And finally, from this directory, we'll copy across the Pixie Linux menu file, so we can give ourselves some form of menuing system to choose what we want to boot into. The Pixie Linux will load the menu. The menu will be the C32. Now we have to have our Linux kernel and RAM disk from the installation disk. So the install directory is essentially my OpenSUSE DVD. I copy the contents of that into the install directory. We're going to copy across then the Linux file, which is the kernel, and the RAM disk, the initrd. All of these, as you can see, from boot i386 loader. This will be from the root of the DVD. So if we take a look back into this directory, so we just run the ls command, we can see the 4 files that we've copied. Pixie Linux, menu, and then the 2 Linux file, the kernel and the RAM disk. Now we need our configuration file to tell Pixie Linux what to do. And this is the Pixie Linux CFG. But with Pixie Linux, this is in fact a directory. So we're going to create a directory called Pixie Linux CFG. And then we'll create configuration files within that. These configuration files could be based around the MAC address or IP address of hosts, or we could then just default to a file called default, and that's what we're going to do. So we create the directory pixielinux.cfg. This is what the Pixie Linux file is going to look for, and in that CFG directory we're going to create a file called default. The default file is used when we don't match on a MAC address file or an IP address file. So this will then work as my coverall configuration file for Pixie Linux. We need to configure the menu in here. So the first lines that I put in is saying, okay, the first thing we're going to do is load the menu binary. We're not going to prompt for this, we're going to load it automatically. We've of course set a title for this. The timeout is actually 60 seconds, so 600/10 of a second. And on the timeout we'll load a label called hard disk. We'll write those labels in now, so I've got the label or stanza in for the hard disk, and that is just booting from the local hard drive. So if we don't select anything, after 60 seconds we'll load from the hard drive. The menu default is going to be installing OpenSUSE, so it will be the selection, and this is where we load then the Linux and RAM disk that we added in, and then the install parameters from our installation server using NFS. So this is the configuration that we need for the server. Obviously we need to double check that the TFTP server is running, and it is, but now we need to be able to tell the DHCP server to let Pixie clients know about this menu. So we go into our dhcpd.conf and we just need to add in a couple of lines here saying where the TFTP server is with the next server line, and then saying what the Pixie boot file is with a file name line. So next server 172.17.0.2, and then file name Pixie Linux.0. Don't forget, you end every line in the configuration of the DHCP server with a semicolon. With this in place, we can then save our DHCP configuration file, so our dhcpd.conf, and don't forget to restart your DHCP server so it rereads this configuration. So with this in place, we can switch over to our client, and when we boot up to a network boot, we load the menu. We can see then that we've got our timeout from 60 seconds counting down. Our menu default is to install OpenSUSE, and if we enter on this to select it, we'll load the Linux kernel and then our RAM disk, and then our installation should begin. Now I'm not going to proceed with the installation, but we'll see the installation screen starting up, the graphical environment. If we wanted to automate the installation totally, we would use then AutoYAST, which is SUSE's way of creating answer files, and we could provide that within our append line along with the install equals, have an AutoYAST equals line. So here we go, we've now booted up to our Linux operating system. We're connecting into the network, and we should start the installation from the network installation server. So the graphical environment should be starting up now, and we can see that the installation will then continue. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you back soon.